Hi, my name is Christian, and today I'll be presenting what connection does Monroeville have to the town of Maycombe and To Kill a Mockingbird. So, where exactly is Maycombe? And while this fictional place is actually inspired by Monroe County, which is known as the literal capital of Alabama. And fun fact, it was actually also the birthplace of Harper Lee, the author of To Kill a Mockingbird, which gives a little insight to how much she knew about the area, and because of the information she had, she wrote the book which inspired it all. So, a little bit about Monroeville history. Monroe Monroeville County was established by David Holmes, which is the guy in the middle, who was the governor of Mississippi Territory in June 29th, 1815. He acquired the land from the Creek Indians in the 1814 Treaty of Fort Jackson. At first, the whole piece of land that he acquired was later reduced in size by creating Montgomery, Coca, and Wilcox counties. And because of that, it also created Monroeville. And the county was named in honor of U.S. President James Monroe, who was at the time Secretary of State under President James Madison. The first settlers who arrived in Monroeville were largely of English descent and came from Georgia, the Carolinas, and Virginia. They opened the first county courthouse. However, it got burned, and all the records of more about the history were lost because of the fire. And then in 1903, the Monroe County government built a new courthouse. So transitioning to that, we'll talk about more about the economy of Monroeville. So, in the early years of the 20th century, it was very difficult economically wise. Agriculture was pretty much the best thing. So, many locals grew cotton on small farms and also corn. They were the biggest crops that they can ever grow. And also like besides that, like there was other things like other like early industries like merchandising, shipping, timber, sawmills. Um, but overall, farming was like the big like money maker in the Monroe County until like until the 20th century, and then because of the 20th century, we're in the 1900s, and because of the 1900s, we're hitting the Great Depression. In which case, next slide, it was shown that like a lot was happening because of the Great Depression. So uh, the land value was declining, and also cotton prices were declining a lot. And it affected Monroeville so much because that was one of their biggest products that they can like sell. And because of the whole decline, it pretty much ruined their whole economic status. On top of that, besides of them living in like in a rural area, racism was still going around at that time. So there's a lot of like racial like difficulty in that area, like people trying to get jobs. And with the Great Depression, it caused even more problems just to like find a job or overall just to like get money. And then because of all that, like diseases that sapped the health of the rural people and the population growth, because of that, divided farms into smaller like groups. And because of that, it became like a decline of all the small white farmers into tendency and poverty. Um, Black people who were living in Monroeville profited from Reconstruction. So they gained some control of their mobility and gained their right to negotiate their labor and residency through contracts. So, like I said, how racism was still going on at that time because of the whole Great Depression era. Black people kind of gain like a sense of like, okay, we have an upper up because we'll work for money or for anything just so you guys can like, so we can all technically not suffer through this Great Depression. Um, and because of the Great Depression that's going on, it leads to the New Deal. Now, the New Deal is the name given to the program of a socioeconomic reform that was initiated by President Franklin D. Roosevelt. And it was a response to the Great Depression. So, a combination of unintended effects of the New Deal, whose agricultural policies forced millions of tenants off the land, and the attraction of urban jobs in defense industries, which pretty much absorbed millions of displaced poor people, white and black, into blue collar jobs in the lower middle class during World War II. So the initial plan was to solve the Great Depression. So people won't starve, so people won't lose monies and jobs. It was to pretty much bring hope back into like the United States. And the New Deal was one of the plans. So the New Deal in itself had a number of programs which helped to revitalize the depressed economy and like giving like relief to the poor by employing men and women to like public work projects and also preserving the natural environment and like folk culture. Um, Even though the New Deal, even though the plan was to like end the depression, it didn't. It did affect like life in Alabama with like a much needed economic assistance with programs. So one of the famous programs that in Alabama was the Civilian Conservation Corps, which employed a lot of young men into segregated units of public work projects across the county. So the CCC, which is the Civilians Corps, enrolled 67,000 young men at the cost of $16 million. And it was good because they were giving all these young people jobs in which, it's supposed to help out everyone. Um, then there was one other program called the Rural Rehabilitation Program, which to provide credit so that poor farmers can rent land and equipment and purchase feed, seed, and supplies. And with that program, it also assisted 115,000 Alabamians. So it sounds really good, but there was one there was several programs that kind of also went downhill. So there was one program called the Agricultural Adjustment Administration, which provided government subsidies to landowners willing to limit cotton production in an effort to increase commodity prices. This caused so many poor farmers to cut their acres and use subsidy checks to replace laborers with tractors and other labor-saving implements. And it was difficult because it was like a decision between, well, should I get profit or should I like not grow that much? It's very confusing, but it affected them a lot. Now, in connection to the book, you can see that the viewpoint of racism was still there, and that from that time in like real world time, it's pretty much seen how like black people and white people were like racially fighting one another because of status. Like, white people believe that they were superior, and black people were just trying to live day by day, trying to like live their lives. Um, Also, like Harper Lee addresses that the people of Maycombe are like struggling financially because of the Great Depression, and it kind of ties with real world history to the book, which again she was born from there, so she experienced that sort of like viewpoint. And also, the courthouse that it's in the book is actually based off the Monroe County Courthouse, which, like I said in the beginning, it connects. That's my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for listening.